I was sitting at my desk, my fingers dancing across the keyboard. That moment, I was working on a software project. It was nearly dawn, and the world continued to sleep, oblivious to me. The sound of my phone pierced the silence of the room. When the name appeared on the screen, I hesitated for a moment. My father. It had been so long that remembering how strained our relationship had become dark in my heart. But still, I answered. Slowly, taking a deep breath, my fingers found the phone. "Hey, Dad," I said, not noticing the coldness in my voice. There was no response. A few seconds passed, and at first I thought it was a connection issue, but then I started to hear it. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor. A sigh. And then that voice. When I heard my father's voice, my insides trembled for a moment. "Listen to me, Elena," he said. The words spilled out with a familiar rasp. "I have to tell you these things. Maybe you should never have heard them, but here it is." It was as light as a feather, yet lethal at the same time. He continued speaking. "He won't make it. It's that simple." For a moment I froze, staring at the phone screen. In my mind, I recalled that old voice. His belittling, his seeing me as worthless. My body shook. But I couldn't do anything. I didn't even have the courage to open my mouth to defend myself. I didn't know what to say. The voice on the other end of the phone felt like it had forgotten me, us, and everything about the past. "A mistake, a joke," my father said, a cold mockery in his tone. "Everything about him will always be a joke. He'll never be one of us." The words cut into me like a knife. I had tried so hard. Worked, exhausted myself, but on the other hand, I'd always been alone. Whenever I wanted to succeed, he'd always lingered behind me like a shadow. Always the same words, always the same disdain. "Don't call him," my mother said, her voice quieter but with a sharp edge. "There's no need to tell him what's right. Don't remind him." But there was something more. Something in my father's voice struck me differently this time. It wasn't judgmental anymore. There was just disappointment. Another blow hit me, and I was still just a shadow. A ghost, as if I didn't belong to this family in any way. My mother's voice came through again for a moment. "It's always been like this, hasn't it? When he succeeds, you don't call, but the moment he fails, you're on the phone. They force him to come back. They only say you did it when they see you. It's that simple." I was lost between my emotions. On one side there was anger, on the other a vast emptiness. The last fragments of my father's voice still echoed in my ears. And then just silence. I hung up the phone. But for a while my eyes remained fixed on the screen, frozen. I still couldn't shake the impact of what I'd heard. It was still them. I was still lost in the shadows of the past. But there was something, I felt something. This was the end. This was enough. When I hung up the phone, the emptiness inside me grew even larger. First it was shock, then a wave of anger surged through me. But I felt nothing, just a cold void. A void where the air had darkened, where everything was gray and meaningless. I leaned back in my chair slowly, my eyes drifting across my computer screen, but I couldn't make sense of anything. In my mind, I could still hear my father's voice, the echoes of his and my mother's words lingering. Suddenly, another notification popped up on my phone. This time, it was Greg. Greg, my closest friend. The one person who had been there for me through the years, even in my darkest moments. There were no boundaries between us. I picked up the phone and read his message. "What's going on, Elena? Is something wrong?" I thought for a few seconds. I tried to find the right words to write back to him, but everything felt utterly meaningless. Then my fingers started typing quickly on the screen. My family. Again. Till stuck in that old mindset. I don't know what to do, Greg. I hesitated for a moment before sending the message. But somehow I had to do it. I saw Greg as the only person I could pour my heart out to, and I was waiting to tell him everything. A minute later, his reply came. "Let's talk when you call me. It's not easy to write this to you." I responded, but suddenly my eyes shifted to the spreadsheet on my desktop. My project. I remembered how important it had once been, how I'd fought for bigger goals. At one point, it had all been a dream. But now success was tangible and certain. Everything I'd achieved, I'd done in defiance of those who tried to steal that reality from me at that moment. And now, after coming this far, I still had to face my family. They had wanted to be there for me at every moment, every success. But I didn't know how I felt. To be like them or to choose my own path. I had to figure it out. Hours later, I called Greg. The first sound from the other end of the line brought me a slow sense of comfort. "Elena, just listen. I'm here whenever you need me," he said. His voice was soothing. But I always approached him with a kind of anxiety. 'Cause I wanted him to understand me, to feel what I felt. Yet maybe he just needed to support me silently. "I don't want to talk to you, Greg. I don't even want to talk about this family. But everything feels so empty. I wanted to achieve something, but I'm still drowning in the same emotions." There was a brief silence. Then Greg's voice came through again. "Maybe you need to let go of some things and choose your own path. But let everything happen in a way you believe is right for you." He was so right. No matter what, I had to listen to that strong voice inside me. And the hardest part was not forgiving. Forgiving those people who belittled me, who didn't see my worth, that would be the biggest mistake I could make in my life. They didn't see me, but I had to see myself. I had to find my own way. A week had passed. Looking back, I couldn't comprehend how fast time had flown. Throughout that week, I tried to focus on my project while simultaneously shaping my relationship with my family in my mind. Every day, those words echoed in my head. "She won't succeed. She'll never be one of us." They still didn't know me. Even though I wanted to believe how important everyone was in my life, there was a truth I couldn't quite accept. They were the biggest obstacle in my life. In the business world, I wasn't the old me anymore. People respected me, and I was making a name for myself with my projects. But something was missing inside me. That void, no matter how successful I became, was something I had lost. A kind of peace, a kind of comfort. I felt like I was lost in the chasm between me and my family. One morning, I found myself in a meeting. My company was hosting an important investor, and I was the one leading the conversation. Amidst the talks, projects, and numbers, the only thing on my mind was my father's words. In that moment, no matter how strong I was, I realized I still felt incomplete deep down. But maybe I thought this was some kind of signal. I had to fill that void within me and keep going no matter what. That afternoon, I decided to meet Greg. Cafe as usual. We sat down slowly. The gray air dominating the city had once again intoxicated my soul. Greg smiled at me, but there was a hint of worry in his eyes. "Again?" Greg said, a knowing look in his eyes. "We've been here before, Elena. You can't keep drifting this far. You're always losing yourself in this void." I just gave it a chance. I wanted to change their perspective, I said, lighting a cigarette and letting the smoke envelop my head. But it didn't change, Greg. Still the same. They never loved me, never understood me. No matter how hard I fought. It's all an illusion. They projected their failures and inadequacies onto me. Once, I wanted to belong to them. Greg stayed quiet for a moment. Then he took a deep breath, looked into my eyes, and said, "Listen to me, Elena. You're bigger than them. You don't need to change how your family sees you, but you do need to find the strength within yourself. Decide who you really want to be, who you truly are. I was emotionally shattered. Truly, for years I had longed to belong somewhere. But the truth perhaps boiled down to one thing: my family wasn't there for me. I wasn't waiting to go back to them anymore. I was still fighting through life on my own. But this time, no matter what, I wouldn't forgive anyone. Greg's words shone like a light for me. Yes, maybe he was right. Instead of trying to build some kind of connection with my family, I needed to choose my own path. I had to find out who I really was. The next morning, while sitting at my desk, I made a decision in a fleeting moment. That decision, though it caused me pain, was significant enough to reshape my life. In that instant, instead of focusing on the project, I resolved to clarify my thoughts. I had to find my own strength. Alone. Sometime later, I set out for an investor meeting in another city. Neither my family nor my past needed to concern themselves with me anymore. Proving myself, finding my own power, existing on my own, that's what I had chosen. This was truly an effort to attain inner peace, to feel free, to leave my family behind, and even though I was broken, to build my own life. On that journey, I would leave behind not only the dark traces of the past, but also the false identities others had imposed on me. That morning, I was so determined. I had made a promise to myself. From now on, everything would be different. Breaking free from my family and the identity they had imposed on me wasn't just liberation, it was a journey to find my true self. I had succeeded, but the only thing left was something to fill the void inside me. Perhaps this was what I had always been waiting for, discovering my real self. In the business world, everything was going well. Investors, projects, successes, they all followed one after another. Yet, despite my achievements, every night when I laid my head on the pillow, the traces of the past still lingered over me. When I woke up, I'd once again be gripped by that cold, suffocating feeling from my old family. In those moments, I could still feel the dark, silent stares of those years. One morning, Greg called me again. When he did, I felt a flicker of unease, as if I'd made a mistake with my phone. But this time, what I felt was different. There was a change. Maybe this time I just needed to talk. "What's going on, Elena? Are you feeling better?" Greg said. His words were gentle, but the worry in them ran deep. "I felt like I really had to make this work," I said, my voice sounding so foreign even to myself. "But something's still missing. There's a void, Greg. I still feel them, their eyes, their voices, the them inside me." "Why?" He stayed silent for a while. Quiet on the other end of the phone reminded me once again how alone I was. Then Greg's voice softened slightly. "Because they still don't know you. Accept that. You can't change your family, but you have the power to choose what kind of person you'll be. You can fill that void independently of them. You have to face yourself, Elena. If anyone's going to fill that emptiness, it has to be you." "How long have I needed to hear this?" I said, unaware of the tears in my eyes. But somewhere deep down, I knew it. I have to choose my own path. Alone, with my own strength. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized that nothing else could truly help me. Perhaps it wasn't about forgiving them, it was about forgiving myself. It was time to love myself again, and most importantly, to leave the past behind. Days later, I thought so much about it. The time had come to confront my family. I hadn't been able to find my own identity because I'd given them more space than they deserved. But now I could do it. No matter what, I had to build myself independently of them. I picked up the phone. For a few seconds, I stayed silent. Making that cold connection meant ending everything. But I was ready. I felt ready. because no matter what, I didn't want to fight the shadows of the past again. It was time to forgive myself and leave that dark, confining world behind. I opened the phone. My father's name appeared on the screen. Slowly, I took a deep breath and called. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice cold and patient, like it was coming from a time when I hadn't heard his voice in ages. We stayed silent for a while. My father responded in the same mocking tone he always used whenever he thought of me. "What do you want? Are you still around? Nothing's changed, has it?" My eyes welled up, but this time I didn't let the tears fall. This had to be different from his perspective. I wanted him to listen to me. "No, it has changed, Dad. I've changed. I found myself again," I said, my voice steady without a tremble. My father grew quieter for a moment. Then he let out a mocking laugh. "You had to say that, didn't you? But you're not in a position to really understand this, Elena. You've always been like this. You can't be one of us." I noticed the tears streaming from my eyes, but they weren't traces of the past anymore. They were the first steps toward building my future. "I don't accept that," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Because I know who I am. I see it through my own eyes, not yours. I accept that everything with you is behind me now. But that doesn't mean I've forgiven you." In that moment, my father's voice fell silent. On the other end of the phone, there was a cold stillness. Instead of blaming him, I felt the power of choosing my own path. As the days went by, the void inside me grew smaller and smaller. I was no longer alone. I had made peace with myself. My successes gave me more than just an identity. They allowed me to find my true self. But my real victory wasn't in forgiving them, it was in forgiving myself. Now, I could be a person independent of the identity the past had forced upon me. I could build my own path, my own identity. And this journey was only just beginning. I was starting to realize how quickly everything in my life was changing. With my successes, I was gaining recognition in the business world, but at some point it felt like everything was missing one crucial piece. I couldn't find myself within. Even the dazzling glow of success couldn't fill the emptiness inside me. And the strangest part was my inability to fully accept this feeling. My past somehow stood by my side with every step, trailing behind me like a shadow. Despite all the distance I'd covered, I didn't truly feel free. Even as I achieved my greatest successes, I felt trapped within my family's perspective. Their looks, their mocking words, every time I thought about how they saw me, the resentment inside me grew. They never accepted me for who I was. Though I didn't want to admit it, in their eyes, I was still a failure. Could I really change it? Could I completely break free from the dark, faded walls of my past? As I asked myself these questions, the answers always led to dead ends. No matter how much success I achieved, there was always that old, abandoned identity waiting for me in some corner. Everything was perpetually wrapped in the echoes of that dark past and their voices. One morning, while working on my projects at the office, my eyes drifted from the computer screen for a moment. There was a void inside me, but neither success nor new projects could fill it. I was always trying to move forward, yet I never looked back. But perhaps confronting my past was the only way to fill that emptiness. In that moment, I called Greg. He was my colleague and, at the same time, my closest friend. Greg wasn't just a coworker to me. He'd been there for me through everything over the years. Whenever I needed him, he was the one person who stood by me, always speaking the truth. After the phone rang for a few seconds, Greg's voice echoed in my ear. "Elena, how are you?" he said. For a moment, I wanted to pour everything out to him, but I decided to stay silent instead. My eyes fixed on the computer, but no matter how long I stared, I couldn't make sense of the lines on the screen. "I don't know, Greg," I said. "I'm still in the same place. My successes keep growing every day, but there's an emptiness inside me." I'm running from the past, but I can't fully break free from them. In their eyes, there's still a failure, you know that? Greg took a deep breath. I could sense from his voice that he was slowly calming down. It's completely normal to feel this way, Elena, he said. But don't forget this, to truly find your own identity, you don't have to make peace with them first. Everything about you is shaped by the strength inside you. You don't have to forgive the past. You need to build a life independent of them. Those words stirred something within me in that moment. Greg was right. For years, I'd waited for their approval, taken in their gazes. But now I had to be free of them. I couldn't let the past define me anymore. Maybe you're right, I said, taking a deep breath. But sometimes I feel like I can't truly move forward without forgiving them. Forgiving feels like breaking the tie with them. Greg responded with a smile in his voice. Forgiving won't drag you back to them. You need to find your own path. Even if they still want to see you through their perspective, you're not that Elena anymore. You have your own identity. Those words suddenly shed light on me. The person I was now wasn't the girl who once waited for her family's approval. I was someone else. Accepting that meant tearing down all the walls. After hanging up the phone, I decided to stay alone in the office a little longer. I wanted to step away from the crowd outside to be by myself. A revolution had begun in my mind. Freeing myself from the burden of the past, finding myself. Now, succeeding didn't just mean thriving at work. It meant completing the missing piece inside me too. Later, as the sun set, I slowly left the office. That day, I stood on the brink of a transformation. I had decided to set aside what my family said, the identity they'd forced on me, and live the rest of my life entirely as my true self. A week later, I began to feel that everything in the business world was going well. My projects, new client relationships, and successes were piling up one after another. Yet every day I woke up with the same emptiness inside me. Success, prestige, new achievements. They were all valuable, but filling the void within me wasn't something success could accomplish. When I paused to think for a moment, I remembered the identity that had constantly been forced upon me. My family, ever since I was a child, had always told me how small I was, how I'd never succeed, how I'd always be a disappointment. Those words continued to darken my spirit, even when I felt more accomplished. No matter how much I tried to suppress this unease and emptiness, no matter how far I went, the shadows of the past wouldn't let me go. I was so successful, yet something was still missing. After every achievement, I asked myself, when they looked at me, who was I, really? That night, I decided to meet Greg. As always, I wanted to talk to him and find some relief. I knew Greg somehow always had the right words and made me feel better. After the meeting, Greg took me to a small cafe just outside the city. A light rain was falling, the air was cold, but Greg ordered me a warm coffee. The gloom of the weather matched the emotional darkness inside me. As I sipped my coffee, I turned to Greg and said, "Greg, I need to make a decision. I really need to find my own path. But even after all this success, I still can't forgive them. Their looks, their words, everything still affects me. Those words keep echoing inside me." Greg took a deep breath, clearly expecting this conversation. "Elena, you don't have to forgive them. Forgiving isn't about approving of them. But you need to do something. You have to figure out how to fill that void without carrying their burden." In that moment, Greg's words reverberated in my mind. He was right. Forgiving wouldn't gain me anything. To free myself, I only needed to accept my own identity. Putting an end to my family's perspective, stopping my attempts to understand them, that would truly liberate me. But then another question surfaced in my mind. Could I really do this? Looking at Greg slowly, I asked, "Can I really do this?" "You have to," Greg said. Because people who don't truly love you shouldn't make you feel indebted to anyone. I don't expect you to love them, I expect you to love yourself. The you that you are now. Those words changed everything in that moment. I felt so certain that I suddenly pulled out my phone and decided to call my father with newfound courage. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. My voice came through slowly but resolutely. The phone began to ring, and as it did, something trembled inside me. Hearing my father's voice always felt like I was about to face something bad. But this time was different. This time, I was ready to confront everything about myself. "Hello, Dad," I said, his voice sounding like a melody I hadn't heard in years. There was a pause. Then came that familiar, mocking tone. "Why are you calling me? What are you still going on about? None of this matters. You always end up in the same place. We don't see anything in you to be proud of. It's that simple." My heart tightened for a moment. Those words made me feel the weight I'd carried for years all over again. But this time it was different. Instead of defending myself, I found a calm within me despite everything. I responded quickly. "Dad, I don't have to listen to this anymore. I waited for so long to be like you, to earn the respect I deserved. But now I know who I am. With every success, I didn't wait for your approval. But here's the truth, I can't be the person you say I am. I'm different." There was silence for a while. I noticed my father didn't respond, how quiet it was on the other end of the line. In that moment, I felt all the burdens and fears of the past slip away from me. Everything about me would now take shape on my own path. "We didn't want you to be this distant," my father finally said. "But when we look at you, we just want to see someone who's lost. You're still making mistakes." That was the perspective my father had burdened me with for years. But now I was ready to face it. "I have to accept that," I said, "but I didn't come here to change you. I just want to be me." And I hung up the phone. This time, I had taken one more step away from the shadows of the past. That evening, I spent the night a little more alone. Finally, instead of an emptiness inside me, there was a kind of peace. I had rejected the identity my past had imposed on me. Now I was accepting my own identity, my own strength. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was also the moment I began to choose my own path, leaving the old self behind and deciding to start anew. It was both a victory over the injustices of the past and the point where I could finally feel my own power. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. In that moment, I felt the burdens in my heart lighten, if only a little. For so many years, I had tried to please them, to earn their approval. But now I realized that in doing so, I had only lost myself along the way. This time, the tears falling from my eyes weren't the weight of the past. They were an expression of a kind of triumph, of inner freedom. That night, I stayed awake for a long time. I had confronted my past, let out my anger and resentments, but something still felt missing. Forgiveness was indeed necessary. But forgiving didn't mean carrying the burden of the past. When I realized this, I understood that the chaos I'd been in was actually a kind of victory. The next morning, as I prepared to return to work, the early sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dark corners of my room. I felt as though I had reached a point of enlightenment. I had left such an intense period behind, and now only one thing remained: to move forward on my own path, no matter what. At work, my days passed quickly, with new projects, clients, and meetings following one after another. But now, everything was different. Even as I celebrated these successes, there was still an emptiness inside me. I needed to look deeper, to pay closer attention. I had to figure out what could truly fill that void. That afternoon, I was ready to attend a major annual conference. The event I was about to join was a significant one in the business world, and over the years, participating in such occasions had always elevated me. But this time, no matter how great a success I achieved, celebrating it held a different meaning. For me, this conference wasn't just a professional gathering. I wanted to honor my own identity and take steps forward, having made peace with my past. As the days went by, the sense of relief within me grew stronger. I had finally severed my relationship with my family completely and liberated myself. Yet something still felt missing. What was it? No matter how far I'd come, there was still an absence. Slowly, I realized what it was. To fully accept myself, I had to detach entirely from that small world and my family's perspective. I remember what I thought in that moment. Accepting who I am meant making peace with the self within me, not with others' expectations. When I entered the conference venue, a large crowd greeted me. All eyes were on me. I was already successful, but what I felt in that moment was far more than success. It was an inner strength, freedom, peace. Each of these led me to reject my past and my family's desire to define me. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. Only I knew who I truly was. At the start of the conference, amidst the applause from the audience, I took a deep breath. Those claps no longer belonged to me alone. They weren't for a family that had doubted me for years or looked down on me. They were for a woman who had found herself. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up to the microphone. For a moment, I thought about how long I'd waited for this. Yes, everything looked like success, but I knew how crucial it was to recognize and accept myself inwardly. Now I was truly free. Being here today is a turning point for me, I said, holding the microphone and pressing every word from my heart. Every success for me wasn't just about external validation, it was part of an inner journey. Only when I found my own identity did I truly become free. Those who don't know me or understand me can keep labeling me, but I no longer need their perspective. I know myself better than they ever will. There was a brief silence. Then the applause began, but this time it felt so much more meaningful. 'Cause this applause wasn't just for external success, it celebrated my inner journey and my acceptance of my identity. In that moment, I felt that I was truly walking my own path and celebrating my identity before the entire world. At the end of the conference, I received countless congratulations from the attendees. Everything was so much more than it appeared. Success wasn't just for the people out there, it was shaped by the voice inside me guiding my way. From that day forward, I would never again be trapped by the patterns of the past. The real victory wasn't the identity my family or society imposed on me, it was the identity I found within myself. At the end of my story, I continue to live, free from the responsibilities the past once placed on me, determined to move forward on my own path. I didn't need to make peace with my family. I didn't need to forgive myself. I simply accepted who I was. And that was a triumph that changed my entire life. After the conference, something in my life had changed profoundly. My successes began to garner even more recognition in the business world, but more importantly, it was my inner peace that mattered most. Recognizing myself, accepting who I was, and making peace with my identity had become more valuable than anything else. Yet I noticed something else. No matter how successful I became, a sense of loneliness would occasionally creep into my heart. Spending the night alone offered an opportunity to slip back into old habits. On my own, I could feel this newfound strength within me, but at the same time, loneliness made itself known. There were people around me, hundreds of them involved with my work, but it still felt like there was something missing in my heart. Emotionally, I was alone. I slowly walked to my window. The city lights glimmered in the distance like a faint sparkle. While everything around me brimmed with life, I could still feel that emptiness inside. After the breaking point with my family, there was a void in my heart. I had fought so hard, but I still felt that something was bothering me. Perhaps it wasn't about forgiving, it was about completely shedding the effects of the past. But that would take time. This loneliness seemed to strengthen me in a way. As I left the past behind, I was filled with a desire to build a new life. Yet, on the other hand, fully escaping the shadow of the past wasn't easy. It would always follow me, as if a scar would remain within me. One day, I decided to meet Greg. As always, I wanted to talk to him and find some relief. Greg was the one person who consistently tried to show me the right path. He had supported me not just in work but emotionally as well. Being with him helped me distance myself even just a little from the burdens of the past. When I arrived at the cafe, Greg greeted me with a smile. His warm smile melted some of the coldness in my heart. "I was expecting this," he said. "I wanted to give you some time, but now I want to see how you're doing." "You know, some things run deep," I replied. "I've made peace with my successes, accepted my identity, but there's still something missing. Completely erasing the past isn't that easy. Loneliness and not being able to forgive. Sometimes I still feel tangled up." Greg narrowed his eyes as he looked at me. "Loneliness will take shape with the strength inside you. Don't forget that. But as you choose to let things go, I'll remind you that you need to leave the past behind. Person doesn't move forward just by turning their back. They do it by burying everything left behind in their heart. You have to achieve that, Elena." His words began to echo within me. As always, Greg felt things deeply and reminded me of them every time. Escaping the shadows of the past, truly using the strength within me, meant taking the biggest step forward. Slowly but resolutely, that night before going to bed, I made a decision to put an end to my thoughts about the past. I no longer wanted to get lost in it or carry it as a burden. No matter how successful I became to find inner peace, I had to erase the traces of the past. There was a way to do this, to say goodbye to my past and the patterns it had imposed on me. It was time to bid farewell to my family's perspectives and the expectations they'd forced upon me about who I should be. This wasn't about rejecting the past, it was about accepting it, finding the strength within me, and rebuilding myself. The next day, in the early hours of the morning, I made a big decision: to talk to my family completely and express all my feelings to them. This was an important step in my process of leaving the past behind. This conversation wasn't just about telling them how I felt, it was also about showing them my true identity. I wanted to cleanse my emotions toward them and reevaluate our relationship. I picked up the phone and called my father. As it started ringing, my heart began to beat faster. But this time was different. I didn't feel fear or anxiety like before. This time, everything felt different. He answered. "Elena, what do you want again?" my father said, his voice still carrying that mocking tone. "I just want to see you, Dad," I said, the words spilling out of me with a calmness in my voice. "I'm aware of everything. You need to stop expecting me to be someone I'm not. I know who I am. Since you don't know me, I'm thinking we should give it one more chance." There was a moment of silence. I couldn't predict what my father would say. But in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need to forgive, I just needed to choose my own path. I no longer had to carry the weight of the past. "Dad," I said, "just give me a chance. You don't need to want me to be like you. But I'm not going to reject you anymore." As I hung up the phone, I felt a deep sense of relief within me. Leaving the past behind was only the beginning. Accepting my own identity and moving forward on my own path, these were my true victories. A week later, I met Greg again. This time, we had a lot to talk about. I turned to Greg slowly and said, "I'm really leaving everything behind now. I won't carry any trace of the past. Everything will be different." Greg smiled and said, "Doing this makes you incredibly strong. Because you're not just leaving the past behind, you're choosing your own path. That's where real strength lies." In that moment, as I watched the world outside, I felt a profound sense of triumph within me. I was now fully accepting who I was. Everything had been inside me from the very beginning. I had forgiven myself and claimed my freedom. Now the control of my life was entirely in my hands. A week passed and everything in my life felt different. My successes at work continued to grow, but now it was more than that. The vast emptiness inside me was gone. Leaving the past behind wasn't just about facing the outside world, it was about confronting the restlessness within me. And in this new beginning, I was finding myself more and more each day. I no longer had to shape myself according to someone else's expectations. The words I'd said to my father a few days ago still echoed in my mind. There had been fear inside me during that conversation, but once I faced it, that fear disappeared. I told him, "Accept me as I am." In that moment, I truly understood what I meant. Like everything else, confronting the past wasn't easy, but once I did, a life that was truly mine began. That morning, before heading into a meeting about a new project, I stood by my window and took a few deep breaths. The morning bustle of the city moved as it always did, but that day, something belonged to me. That's when I realized it. The void inside me had finally closed. I was truly accepting myself. Embracing my own strength and potential was far more valuable than the painful mistakes of the past. As I got ready to head to the office, Greg suddenly came to mind. Talking to him always made me realize how much my life had changed. His patience, understanding, and unwavering support had somehow helped me find peace within myself. Greg always reminded me of who I was. I wanted to tell him this, but in that moment I realized something he might not understand. My life was now a journey I no longer needed to explain to others. I wanted to know myself solely within my own being. Before heading to the meeting, I decided to call Greg. This time, I wanted to tell him how I truly felt. Because now it wasn't just to him, I wanted to tell the whole world one thing: I know who I am. The phone rang, and a few seconds later, Greg's voice came through. "Yes, Elena," he said. The slight curiosity in his tone, as always, brought me a sense of calm. "Greg, I want to share something with you," I said. "Right now, it feels like everything has fallen into place. It might be hard for you to understand, but I've finally accepted myself as I am. I've freed myself from the burdens of the past, from my family, and from society. I've accepted myself just as me." Greg paused for a moment, but then I could hear a genuine smile in his voice. "I'm so glad to hear that," he said. "And honestly, I'm proud of you for taking such a powerful step. Seeing things get better for you inspires me too." In that moment, I felt a warmth in my heart. I was no longer just reconciling with the shadows of the past. I was accepting that everything was now shaping itself around me as a whole. Success, inner peace, and harmony with my identity had all come together. A week later, I secured a major business opportunity. My company was on the verge of signing an important deal, and the responsibility had been entrusted to me. This agreement was a significant step in my career, but I no longer saw this success as just a professional achievement. It was a turning point in my life. Because now it was part of everything: success, my personal journey, and my freedom. First, I felt a surge of excitement. But then I realized the real reason this deal meant so much to me. Confronting my past, accepting my family, and ending that relationship in a healthy way had brought me success not just in work, but in every aspect of life. In that moment, I was experiencing one of the greatest achievements of my life. But it wasn't just a victory in business, it was an inner triumph. Confidence I had in myself and my inner strength stood above everything else. In the meeting room, I led with a smile on my face. People admired me and the work I was doing. Yet deep down, I knew I hadn't won this success just for myself. I had earned it to show the world what I could achieve once I accepted who I was. Many people measure success by external factors, but true success begins with finding your own inner strength. That day, I felt at my peak, both professionally and personally. It wasn't just my achievements being celebrated anymore, it was my journey too. The end of the conference, I joined the company's senior executives for a celebratory dinner. I quietly stepped aside for a moment and reflected on everything. Yes, this was a victory. But it was also a triumph of breaking free from the weight of the past, accepting my own identity, and taking full control of my life. I had said goodbye to all the troubles in my relationship with my family, my inner conflicts, and the approval I'd waited for over the years. And that night I said to myself, from now on I will just be me. Neither the past nor the eyes of others will define me. The end of my story, I now know what true victory is. Finding my own identity, breaking free from the chains of the past, and having everything accepted as it is for me. Proving of myself, knowing who I am, and existing in this world solely through my own strength. This has become the greatest triumph of my life. Elena was a woman who had faced her past, discovered her inner strength, and ultimately claimed her freedom. Success in every sense was under her control. Her ties with her family had ended, but most importantly, she was determined to walk her own path. With every step, she savored the taste of freedom and independence. Who was the real winner in this journey? Elena had found the strength and peace within herself. Time was passing quickly, but inside me, everything seemed to slow down. With each passing day, I was delving deeper into my inner peace and truly beginning to discover my freedom. In every success, every step, every relationship, I knew that the expectations of the past, my family, society, or anyone else could no longer define me. This wasn't just a decision, it was a kind of liberation I felt in my heart. I no longer limited myself with anything. Every day, I continued to choose my own path and live every moment with my own identity. The complete severance of my ties with my family had left a void within me. But that void felt like a meaningful way to let go of the past, far more significant than forgiveness. Though it was hard to accept, I realized I could be part of a life that belonged solely to me. Even if my family never accepted me, I had finally accepted myself. One evening, Greg and I were sitting in a restaurant. As we slowly ate our meal, I wanted to share all the thoughts running through my mind with him. I was grateful for the support he'd given me over the years and for helping me discover my inner strength. "Greg, if it weren't for you," I said, trying to gather my words, "my life would have been so different. Thank you for always telling me the truth. It's because of your support that I found myself." Greg smiled and tilted his head slightly. "Your journey isn't just important for you, it matters to the people around you too. All I've ever wanted is for you to live a life at peace with yourself, happy and serene." In that moment, I realized how deep our friendship was. Greg wasn't just a friend. He was a cornerstone in my journey of self-discovery. But at the same time, I was determined to live my life entirely on my own now, without needing anyone else's approval. And then, that evening, there was another topic at the table: my ties with my family. With each passing day, I was beginning to fully accept and let go of that relationship. Yet, somewhere in my heart, I was still touching a wound, longing for them to understand me. That hunger for their acceptance was really my attempt to feel like I belonged to them. One morning, as I sat at my desk and opened a few emails on my computer, something felt different. This time, I wasn't just satisfied with my success, I was fulfilled by my inner journey too. While focusing on work, I recalled the phone call I'd made at the end of last year. My final confrontation with my family. I had truly tried to forgive, but at some point I realized forgiveness shouldn't mean letting them play a role in my life or guide me. I didn't need their approval, 'cause I knew who I was. One morning, I decided to call my father again. This time, I wanted to speak as a person, free from the judgments and resentments of the past. I dialed, the phone rang for a few seconds, and then my father's voice came through. "Elena," he said. "What's going on now?" For a moment, I felt something strange inside, but this time there was no fear or hesitation. Slowly, I recognized myself. "Dad," I said, I'm truly leaving everything behind. I'm aware of it all. I've become just me. Accepting this and living my life independently of them has brought me peace. I don't want to forgive or change anything anymore. I just want to move forward on my own path. There was a pause. Then the hardness in my father's voice softened slightly. It's hard to accept this, I know. But I still love you, he said. And in that moment I realized, what I needed wasn't their acceptance, it was my own inner acceptance and peace. I had truly liberated myself. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Doing this, letting go of the past and choosing my own path, was my greatest victory. I had faced my family one last time, but now I knew I could keep moving forward on my own journey. That evening, as I watched the city, I realized how much everything had changed. I was no longer just a businesswoman. I was a woman who had accepted herself and discovered her inner strength. Nothing defined me anymore. The perspectives of my past and my family were too far away to shape my identity. Elena had won the greatest victory of her journey. By accepting herself, breaking free from the burdens of the past, and existing solely as her own identity, she had claimed her freedom. This journey wasn't just a success story, it was also the tale of an inner transformation, of a woman finding her own strength and presenting her true self to the world. True freedom wasn't measured by external successes, but by the peace within. And Elena had finally reached that inner peace.